Greetings, Gilliam the Rogue here, once again, back with an Elder Scrolls Online Let's Talk segment. Before anyone makes a funny remark, I'm not wearing a robe, I'm wearing a ghetto snuggie. It is cold as hell in Wisconsin, especially in my basement, and this is pretty much going to be my garb or get up for the next, 8 months, I guess, until we are out of this cold hell. So, today we're going to be talking about the Sorcerer class, and we're going to be beginning with their primary, or first, skill line, which is Dark Magic. Now, there are a lot of things wrong with this skill line when you look at the big picture. Individually, each of these skills are worth running in some way, shape, or form in the game. It's not that the abilities are bad. The biggest issue of this skill line is that all of these abilities do the same thing in a different animation or a different mechanic. So a lot of them deal with crowd control, which is going to be either stunning or immobilization. And when you have a kit that's revolved around doing the same thing, but in different iterations, you see a lot of pigeonholing in terms of build diversity, because if you're doing the same thing with different animations and you're kind of achieving the same goal, you're not able to branch out and make interesting or dynamic or very different sort of builds when you're going through these skill loadouts. So a lot of this video is going to be talking about discrepancies of morph options in terms of what I'd like to see done in terms of helping the Sorcerer branch out of this really rigid playstyle that it fits in. Because in PvE and PvP, you kind of play Sorcs the same way no matter what, if you're trying to be efficient. Yeah, you can go the non-standard tank or healer route, and you can do some stuff with that, but in terms of meta application, like you're going for a leaderboard or you're trying to be the best of the best and you're trying to make a build and do something efficient with it, you're not able to choose from a lot of different skills because they do the same thing. So I will be giving a lot of feedback in terms of where these skills I think would best fit, because there are a lot of really poor morph options in this skill line that almost no one takes. So a lot of this will be based on feedback, but I will be explaining, as all Let's Talks go through how these abilities interact, what they scale with, and helping you, the player, make an informed choice in terms of why something's not so good, where it might be good, how to kind of break away from the meta, and do your own thing. So, as always, we will begin with passive abilities. Our first passive ability is a really strong but simple one, and that's Unholy Knowledge. What that's going to do is it's going to reduce the magic and stamina cost of all of our abilities that we have access to. So regardless of their class ability, regardless of Dark Magic, Daedric Summoning, Storm Calling, it could be a weapon skill, any skill in the game that we use, if it uses magicka or stamina to cast, it will have 5% less. This will be additive with other cost reductions, so it's going to see a slight diminishing return because it's going to go to the base. So if you stack a lot of cost reduction, you're going to start seeing some issues in terms of why am I not getting the full 5%? And it's because it's removing from base and it's additive with other things instead of multiplicative. So there is a pseudo diminishing return effect if you have lots of sources. So if you had 3 cost reduction jewelry pieces and then cost reduction here, and then from light or medium armor, that sort of stuff, then you're going to start to see a little bit of a hindrance in terms of efficiency, but still very powerful skill. It's going to help bring down a lot of these high cost abilities to a little bit more manageable place. So a very nice resource management skill for both magic and stamina DPS, helps the tank, helps the healer role as well. Next passive is called Blood Magic. Unfortunately, this is the extent of the Blood Magic the Sorc has available to them. We don't have any cool spells. It's just a passive, but it's a pretty nice passive, and what's going to happen is whenever you hit an enemy with a Dark Magic skill, it doesn't have to be damage, it could just be any of these skills that we apply to a target, it's going to heal us for 8% of our max health. Now, things to note is that this passive has a 0.5 second ICD, so if you use 2 forms of proccing it, if we use this skill, which is it has a 3-second arming time, I'll get to it later, and then we use another instant cast or delayed skill, and if they both proc at the same time, we're not going to get 2 blood magic procs, we're only going to get 1, because it has a half-second internal cooldown. The other thing is that this skill will read negative effects that are placed. So again, since it doesn't have to deal damage, some of these abilities just place a debuff on a target and they will proc the blood magic skill. However, if you reapply that skill and it hasn't faded yet, the game will read it as the original skill, that you haven't applied a new blood magic skill, that you're just refreshing. So you don't get another blood magic proc. So I can kind of demonstrate this right here, where I have this target skeleton, and I'm going to cast an ability that does no damage. It immobilizes the target. And immobilizations don't grant CC immunity because they're not hard CC. You still have control of your character, you just can't move or turn around. So I cast this, and we notice blood magic procs. But if I cast it again, even though I casted a new ability, the blood magic proc, the heal, has not gone off again. And then if I go over here, the same thing happens. If I hit this new target, I get blood magic. But if I recast and it hits all of them, even though the original has not faded, I will not get that heal. So you have to wait until that cast or that debuff has faded. However, there are multiple ways to get heals from this. So I could use this skill and then use another channel time. And since this is a different form, this does damage, it's going to give me that blood magic proc. So it's a very nice tool for helping the Sorcs stay alive. Unfortunately, not a lot of these skills are going to be... You're not going to be able to pull onto them in the middle of combat at a moment's notice. You're not going to really be able to get an instant cast out of this heal unless you're using the Encase skill or Rune Prison, which again, I'll be explaining momentarily. But since these don't deal damage and they have CC, it's not really a reliable heal. The other thing is that this does not proc on every tick of damage with ability. So some of these abilities that we have in this kit are AoE. So this one, I can place it down, and I'll explain it later, but we see 2 of them hit, but I only got that 1 blood magic proc. So it really bottlenecks the efficiency of this passive because we can't proc it more than once every half second. That, and when we do have damage over time functions, there's only one of them in this dark magic skill line. Each tick will not proc blood magic, only the initial hit. So I'll explain where and when these abilities interact with this passive, and I'll kind of give more insight. It's not as good as it seems, unfortunately. I would really like to see this proc on every tick or every cast of a dark magic ability, and then every time a function of one happens. So like, we'll look at a damage morph of negate magic. Every time it does damage, it doesn't heal us. But if it did, that would be much more potent in terms of being like, okay, well, I can use this ultimate, get a little bit of self-healing out of it and damage, and have this reason other than, okay, maybe it's not as good as Meteor or Destro Ultimate, but it does have this utility. So, improving blood magic's proc rate in terms of either removing the ICD or allowing it to proc more frequently with some of these abilities, or adding new abilities that incentivize the procking of it would really, really help the Sorc in terms of solo application. But they're not really in need of a lot of healing. They have a lot built into their kit elsewhere, but that's going to rely on other skills, other stuff. So a passive way to do so would really help the blood magic, and it would be awesome to see some actual blood magic come to the dark magic skill line to make this feel more in place. Because right now it's like, why isn't this on Nightblade? Because they're the more blood magic. So whatever, very nice passive, just my insight or 2 cents on how to approach the situation. Next is Persistence, and Persistence is a buff that every class has in at least one of their kits, and that's a duration extender of that skill or of damage over time or whatever it is. What this is going to do is it's going to increase the duration of all these abilities in our Dark Magic skill line by 20%. Now, the really cool thing about this passive that most passives don't do is this applies to every single duration associated with this skill line. So a lot of times, for example, Dark Veil or Dark Persistence or whatever the heck it is for the Nightblade, that increases duration of shadow abilities by 20%. That doesn't apply to the crowd control functions or the utility functions of some of their abilities. However, for the Sorcerer in Dark Magic, that will apply to Dark Magic or their CC or utility function of the ability. So it's a kind of a unique spin on the duration increaser that every class has access to. Everyone has some little hiccup or special interaction within it that changes up how this passive operates. So what it's going to do is it's just going to increase the duration by 20% of all abilities. So negate magic additionally or traditionally has 10 seconds. It becomes 12 seconds with this passive. Crystal Shards, one of the morphs, has a stun that lasts 2 seconds. It becomes 2.4. All of these things, even in case and immobilized, normally lasts 4.5, becomes 5.4. So it's a very, very helpful passive in terms of what it is enabling, because it's going to increase the CC duration of immobilizes, of stuns, of silences, stuff like that. So it's a very helpful and efficient passive. Last passive we have is the unique class buff passive that belongs to the Sorcerer. So every class has a unique buff associated with them that you cannot get anywhere else in the game except for that class. And the Sorcerer's is Minor Prophecy. So whenever they activate a dark magic skill, they're going to give themselves and up to 60 nearby allies, or 59 because it has a 60-person target cap, you and 59 other players, Minor Prophecy for 20 seconds, increasing your spell critical rating by 3% across the board. So it's really helpful for organized groups. Even if you're solo, this will apply to yourself. So it's a very nice passive. You can't get Minor Prophecy anywhere else in the game, so it kind of incentivizes, hey, I always want at least one Sorc in a group if I have at least 2 or 3 magic DPS. It will help healers crit a little bit more with healing. It'll help tanks if they're using abilities, if they're healing or doing whatever, if it scales with spell crit. So it's a very efficient and nice little boon that the Sorc says, hey, pick me, you want me in your group sort of thing. Now we'll move into our active abilities. So our active abilities, this is going to be quite long because a lot of these abilities have really weird interactions that kind of break the rules of many traditional functions of the game. But our first ability is called Crystal Shard, and this recently got reworked. Before, this used to stun whenever it dealt damage. Now that is no longer the case. It's going to scale with our max Magicka, spell damage, spell critical, and spell penetration. We see that it costs max Magicka. It's going to deal direct damage, so in the CP system, it'll scale with Erosion, Elemental Expert, Elfborn, and again, Master at Arms. So it's a really, really nice skill in terms of damage production with our morphs, but at base, it has a cast time associated with it. We have to wait to cast this ability 1 entire second where we're just kind of sitting around, not being able to do anything, and then we get the damage. So here I can kind of just demonstrate. We kind of just conjure some crystals up out of thin air and launch it at the target. But during this duration, I am channeling. So that means my character is going to move 50% slower. I cannot block. If I do, it will cancel the skill. I cannot dodge roll, or if I do, it will cancel the skill. And I can be bashed or interrupted by special abilities like Crushing Shock, Venom Arrow, and stuff like that. So there's a lot of risk associated with this simple cast. And we notice that it has a 28 meters range, so we can kind of alleviate this risk by being from afar and kind of playing the range role. But it also has a 3.8k Magicka cost without any cost reduction aside from our Unholy Knowledge. So this is above 5 or 4k Magicka without this passive. I don't have light armor passives. I don't have anything else. So it's a very, very expensive skill, and it's going to be a big reason why many players will not want to utilize this in terms of an efficiency rate. In terms of leveling, yeah, it's the first skill you get. You don't really have a lot of options, so you're going to do something that players refer to as hard casting, which is where you intentionally go through the cast time and you hard cast this ability, let it go through, and boom, it does damage. This is usually frowned upon because it is a DPS deficit compared to other abilities we'll have access to later in the game, and it incurs a very high operational loss because, again, really high Magicka cost, and it has a lot of counterplay in PvE and PvP. In PvE, you're going to be slower, so if you're trying to run out of that red circle when you're doing this, you're going to have to cancel your cast. If you get bashed or you get hit with mechanic, like you're going to have to dodge roll. There's a lot of issues with the skill line and cast times in general in terms of why people don't really want to utilize them. But pretty straightforward skill, does some decent damage, not going to be anything amazing, kind of not justified at the moment. Now, what I would like to do with this skill is there is a morph option called Crystal Frags, which is going to have a 35% chance when using Magicka, aside from this skill, to make this skill instant cast and costs 50% less magicka. So it's an RNG-based mechanism that rewards the caster for using or spending their magicka. And then it's like, oh, hey, here's this empowered version. I'll demonstrate it in a little bit. I really believe that this function should be on all three morphs. So the base morph and then both morph options. Because if you do this, that really incentivizes the player and says, okay, you might not have a true spammable, but at least you have access to a really nice damage-dealing function out of the dark magic skill line, because there are no quote-unquote spammables in the Sorcerer kit aside from this ability, but since it has such a high deficit associated with it, we can't really make use out of it unless we have the Crystal Frags morph, because that really helps the magicka cost go down, it helps it become more efficient because there's no wonky cast time, and it just feels a lot better to utilize. So I really believe moving that function and putting it on all three will make all of them a valid choice. The base morph I will want to use when I'm leveling up. It's going to be like, oh, hey, cool, I get this powerful cast. It feels good to use. I can think of interesting ways to like preload, so spending magicka, buffing up before I enter a trash fight or a quest boss or whatever it is. You can kind of give that player the sense of progression, learning how to utilize the skill, and then moving forward instead of just having this really one-dimensional, oh, I'm casting a skill, it does damage. Oh no, I have to block. Now I wasted my time. So I really think that would help a lot. But we'll look at our morphs. Our first morph is called Crystal Blast, and what this is going to do is it's going to still have that really long cast time. It's still going to have that super high magicka cost, but it's going to have two new functions. It's going to stun the original target that we hit, so whatever we're casting it on, that original target will be stunned for 2 seconds. That becomes 2.4 with our persistence passive, and then it will also deal damage in an area around that target. Now, unlike most skills that mention enemies in the area will be affected with this skill, that usually refers to a cone or a very small area within like a 2 meters radius, or not radius, but a like meter range that will be hit. So if they're standing by the side, they take the damage. However, Crystal Blast is very unique. It has a very large radial detection, and I'll take this morph, I'll take the other one to show later, but if we notice with this skill, I'm going to still hard cast it. I hit the target, he gets stunned. We notice that it has a ×2 modifier, and it's because it hit this target as well, right here. So again, I can demonstrate. I cast it on him, and it has an AoE radius blast. It's okay, it's hitting that target. However, if I come over here and do that, it's going to hit 3 targets. It's going to hit this one, the original cast, which will be stunned, and then it's going to hit these two because it's in a 6, I think it's 6 or 5 meters AoE radius. It might even be larger, but it's quite large in terms of what it's reading. So it hit this target and that target. And then if I move to this guy and cast it on him, it will hit all 5 targets. We notice it had a ×4 and an initial hit. So it's hitting all of these targets in a radius. So it has a radial detection instead of a cleave detection. So it's really efficient for AoE damage. However, this extra AoE damage is going to do less than the initial hit, and only the initial hit was stunned. So you're not going to stun all of those targets. So it's not an AoE stun, and that AoE blast is a little bit less damage than the initial hit, about 50% less. So it's still nice for AoE cleave potential, but again, the biggest issue of this is that it has that really high magicka cost and that 1 second cast time. So I can just cast this a few times. Yes, I'm not in gear, I don't have food on, that sort of stuff, but we notice it's this humongous drain on my magical pool to do so. It's clunky, it's really hard to weave with. That means like fitting in a light attack in between each one. So overall, really, really not that great. ZeniMax tried to incentivize this morph by taking the stun from Crystal Frags and putting it on Blast, but again, most people aren't going to take it because it's not efficient enough. It doesn't replicate the power in any way, shape, or form of C-Frags because that instant cast and that magicka cost reduction. So I really think putting that on all of these morphs would do fantastically for this skill and help make a little bit more decision making. Now let's consume this respec scroll and we'll take a peek at our other morph. So our other morph is called Crystal Fragments, and what this is going to do is it's going to have that 35% chance when using a magicka ability to become instant cast, and it's also going to deal 10% more damage and cost 50% less magicka. So it's a really, really efficient tool because you don't really have to use this skill. Like, I don't have to sit here and worry about this awful cast time with this super high magicka rate. Instead, what I can do is I can spend magicka elsewhere in my kit. So I can run another ability like Wall of Lightning or Force Pulse or whatever it is. Whenever I spend magicka that's other than this skill, I will have a chance to proc Crystal Frags. Here we notice, after I cast it in case, I got a Crystal Frag proc, my hands are glowing purple, and now I can just, boop, instant cast, throw out the Crystal Frag. It does bonus damage, does not stun anymore, but it also costs 50% less magicka. So it's really helpful. So I can kind of just spam cast this ability until I get a proc. There it is. We notice it only costed about 6% of my magicka when I cast it instead of 12%. So it's super helpful in terms of bringing that cost down and increasing the damage and making the skill feel a lot better in terms of just enjoyment and functionality in combat. So it's really, really powerful. Now, if we did take this proc function and put it on all of them, I really think increasing the damage of Crystal Frags, the proc option would help a little bit more. So add some utility. So since we have that chance to become instant cast on all of them, that would be fine. Like, all of them have the 35% chance when casting magicka to get the free cast. Then we have Crystal Blast, retain the stun, and then we have it deal AoE damage, and then we have Crystal Frags have that 50% cost reduction and maybe 10 to 20% additional damage. Right now it's 10%. I think if we took that cost reduction, or the chance to become instant cast and put it in all three, we would want to incentivize Crystal Frags a tiny little bit more as a damage option. So we have a really powerful AoE and CC option, and then we have a pure damage dealer option, which is all about single target. So we have some discrepancy in terms of, okay, do I want AoE damage or crowd control, or do I want some extra damage and DPS in terms of cost reduction and that sort of stuff. So I think that's the best way to kind of incentivize both morphs while having both of them be powerful. But now we'll move on to our next skill, and that is Encase. Encase is going to cost magicka, but it's not going to scale with anything because it doesn't do any damage. What it does is it instead immobilizes the target for 4.5 seconds at base, and then if we have persistence, we're going to notice that's going to go up to 5.4. So it's an immobilize. What that means is that a target affected by this cannot move and they cannot turn, but they can still freely act in terms of dealing damage. They can remove this by purging. It is considered a negative effect, or dodge rolling. Dodge rolling gives immunity to immobilizations after we do so. So if we dodge roll, that will break it, and then we'll gain a short window where we'll be immune to immobilizations. However, it will not grant CC immunity even if the full duration ends. So I cast it on this target, and during this time, he cannot move. Obviously, he's a target dummy, he can't move. But if he was an actual target, he would not be able to move from that position. And since you don't gain CC immunity from this, and this ignores CC immunity, he's not good. I could keep him here forever if I wanted to by just casting it over and over and over again, unless he applied immobilize immunity. Jesus Christ, I can't speak. Sorry. So yeah, very, very potent in terms of locking enemies in place. We notice it has an 18 meters range in terms of how far it goes out, and then it has a 6 meters width. So it covers a pretty large distance. We notice if I come back here, I can hit all 4 of these targets with it in a line. I think I can hit 3 of these guys if I do it. Yep. So it's super powerful in terms of an AoE immobilize. So it really helps lock enemies in place, but that's all it's going to do. It's going to have a really high magicka cost, pretty much the same, 1 more magicka than in Crystal Frags for whatever reason, but it cannot be blocked and stuff like that. And the initial hit can't be dodged because it's an AoE, but it can be dodged after you end it because, again, AoE skills normally are not meant to be dodged. So pretty decent in terms of a CC or pseudo CC. Soft CC is what some players call them. In terms of just really nice group utility. More of a PvP skill, not going to be that great in PvE. But now we'll look at our morphs. Our first morph is called Shattering Prison, and all this is going to do is this will deal damage when the effect ends. So if you purge it, I'm not sure if that allows it. If anyone knows the answer to that, let me know in the comments. If you dodge roll it, I believe it does damage when it breaks when you're dodge rolling. And then if you let the full duration go, it also deals damage. So since it doesn't specify if the full duration goes off, that usually means that the skill will do so. Unfortunately, I didn't ask anyone to come test this with me. So again, if you know the answer, pop that in the comment section. But pretty straightforward, just adds a little tiny bit of damage. That damage will scale with max magicka, spell damage, spell critical, and spell penetration as it does magic damage. Furthermore, in the CP system, it'll scale with spell erosion, elemental expert, elfborn, and master at arms because it's direct damage. Pretty straightforward. Pretty weak in terms of what this skill does. It costs too much magicka, and the damage is pitiful in terms of what it does, so it's really not all that great. I would love to see Shattering Prison become a more either DPS or utility role, maybe a heal, like an AoE heal or something like that, to give the Sorcerer a little bit of discrepancy in terms of morph options, because right now, most of the times we're going to take Restraining Prison, because Shattering Prison's extra damage is not justified because it's going to be affected by mitigation, it's a really low tooltip, stuff like that. You can take it, it's not the worst, because kind of both of these morph options are more flavor than actual really changing up the skill, but I really think reducing the cost and adding some damage or some healing or some sort of utility that's more focused on like empowering the Sorc or debuffing the enemy would be more advantageous to the skill line. So we'd have like, oh hey, more dark magic skills that I can maybe use in PvE or PvP that aren't based on crowd control, because usually in PvE crowd control functions are very weak. A lot of targets are immune to them, they don't really enable anything, while in PvP it's like, ooh great, I want to lock my opponent who's sitting in an AoE spell, or so they can't move around too much and I can kind of just pelt them down from a range or prevent them from running away. So it's really nice in PvP, but really weak in PvE. So I think giving some damage or healing or some sort of utility to the Shattering Prison morph would really help incentivize, say, hey, this skill you can use in PvE now. Our other morph is called Restraining Prison. This is usually the preferred morph, and what it's going to do is after the effect ends, this enemy will be snared for 4.8 seconds. I don't know how long the slow is, or not how long, how powerful the snare is. I think it's like 40 or 50%. It's not listed on the tooltip. It is quite powerful. You definitely feel it when it's placed on you. You move like a snail. So it's really helpful for helping keep enemies in place, even if they dodge roll out of that snare or the immobilization. You won't have the snare immunity unless you purge it or you put on a buff that gives you immunity to snares. So it's really, really strong in terms of keeping an enemy in place, especially on roly-poly builds. It makes them waste their stamina to either apply forward momentum or shuffle again to get that snare and immobilization immunity. So it's really helpful in terms of either punishing an enemy to lock them in place, and kind of even after that effect ends, they're slow and they can't get away from you, so you can hit them again, or to waste their resources shrugging it off of them. So it's a really powerful ability in terms of either, again, locking someone in place or forcing them to waste GCDs and resources. So very nice skill for PvP. Again, not good in PvE. Now we'll go on to our next skill, and that is Rune Prison. And Rune Prison is one of the best crowd controls in the game. It's currently bugged where if a target's blocking, it won't proc on them. It will be fixed in the next incremental patch. We're on the first week of the Clockwork City going live on PC. It'll be fixed next week, so it's going to be fixed quickly. Don't worry about it. The skill is meant to not target players who are crowd control. So what they did with every class that has one of these skills, it's a really powerful crowd control. It cannot be blocked and it cannot be dodged, meaning there's no counterplay. You're gonna get CC'd unless you have CC immunity. So you've recently CC broken, maybe you've drank an immovability potion, maybe you've used the heavy armor skill immovable. Unless those things are met and you have that crowd control immunity, you will be hit by Rune Prison. No ifs, ands, or buts. So it's really, really strong in helping keep a target locked in place. So that really obnoxious perma-blocker build on Monday when this gets fixed, you will be blocking no more because it's going to ignore block. That really obnoxious roly-poly who's dodging all of your skills, sit the fuck down. It's time to be stunned. This skill, it does that. It's really, really helpful in locking enemies in place. It can be casted from 28 meters away, and it has a 3-second duration. So it's a very, very efficient skill. Well, notice I casted it on this target. It goes to him. Boom, he's stunned. And then we notice if I try and cast it on him again, he's CC immune, and it's like, nope, you can't do that. He's already CC immune. But if I look at a new target, I can place it on him, and I can place it on an infinite amount of targets. So all of them will be stunned. But if the target is CC immune, again, we cannot cast it on him. So it's really, really helpful in terms of saving our magicka instead of just wasting it on a CC immune target. That's very, very nice in terms of change. And then also just unmitigatable, unpreventable stun unless you have CC immunity. So very, very powerful. It does have a hefty magic cost, but it is much cheaper than Encase or Crystal Frags. Again, with the Unholy Knowledge passive, that will go down even more. And then if I had, let's just take some medium armor passives and kind of demonstrate that its cost is relatively straight, like 2,800 magic. Yeah, that's a lot, but at the same time, that's pretty cheap compared to some of these other abilities. Now we'll look at our morphs, and our first morph is called Rune Cage, and what this is going to do is if the duration lasts the full 3 seconds, it will explode for damage. That magic damage is going to scale with magicka, spell damage, spell critical, and spell pen, since it deals magic damage. In the CP system, it will scale with spell erosion, elemental expert, elfborn, and master at arms, because it's direct damage. Base skill is not going to scale with anything, but again, Rune Cage will scale with that magicka, spell damage, etc. Still going to be 3-second stun, still going to be casted at 28 meters away, still cannot be blocked or dodged, and cannot be casted on CC immune enemies. So it just makes it so if an enemy has no resources to CC break, it will deal damage to them. So it mentions if the full duration goes off, so I think if the enemy or the target is purged or they CC break it, they do not take the damage. Again, I haven't tested it because it requires another person to do so. A target dummy can't CC break, so I can't really test it. If you know the answer and you're seeing some discrepancies like, oh, people who CC break still take the damage, leave a comment, please. I will remedy that with an annotation in the corner or something. But relatively straightforward, not going to deal a lot of damage. This usually isn't the morph we want to take. Instead, we usually want to be taking Defensive Rune, and this is going to rework the skill and operate as a buff. So we notice it doesn't deal damage, it's not going to scale with stats, but it has a 144-second duration. No, that does not mean you stun a target for 144 seconds. What happens is instead of casting this on the target and stunning them for 3 seconds, we cast this on ourselves, and the next target that hits us with a damaging ability will proc this effect. And what's going to happen is they will be stunned for 3 seconds. It cannot be blocked, it cannot be dodged, and the really nice thing is that if that target is CC immune, they will not trigger this effect. So if a target who just CC broke comes and hits me, my Defensive Rune will retain until the next time he isn't CC immune or a new target comes to hit me. So there is currently a bug where some things that are inherently CC immune, like the Nightblade Shades, they can't be crowd controlled. They will eat this skill. That is, again, being fixed. We don't know when, but it will be fixed. And then, yeah, really, really strong. It's just a come fuck with me button and see what happens sort of thing. And it lasts a really long time. 2 minutes and 40 seconds, or 2.4 minutes, so it's not 40 seconds. It's 2 minutes and like 33 or 23 seconds. So it lasts quite some time. It's very, very helpful. And it's really, really the preferred morph because it's like, okay, before I go into this fight, or maybe I don't want to get ganked, I'll put this on me, and the Nightblade who tries to snipe me from stealth, boom, he just stunned himself, and now I have this time to scan the area. Where is the target? Oh, he's stunned. I'm going to light him up with a curse, make sure he can't enter stealth, and then I'm just going to nuke him down. So it's a really, really helpful tool. But now we'll move on. Our next skill is called Dark Exchange. This is not going to have anything fancy with it. It's not going to scale with any stats. However, it does have a heal associated with it. This heal will be affected by percent amplifications such as Major Minor Mending, Major Minor Vitality. In the CP system, that heal will be benefited by Blessed. It cannot crit, so it will not use Elfborn, but it will also use Crit Recovery because we're healing ourselves. The resource management has or it also has a resource management function. So we cast this skill, it drains stamina, it has a cast time again, meh, yucky cast times. But when we get off that cast time, we get that 8k health and we get 4,700 magicka. Now again, that magicka will not go up and down. The only way to lower the efficiency of this is to be affected by the Siphoner passive. This will reduce that resource return by 15%. That's the only way to get any less. In Battle Spirit, the heal will be cut in half, but the resource return will not. So it's very helpful in helping the Sorcerer get some of their magicka and health back. So again, it has a 1 second cast time. We see the cast, I just wave my hands through the air, it goes through, I get the heal, and I get the resource management. Now, the really nice thing is that we notice is that it's not draining stamina if I cast it and immediately cancel it. So since it has a cast time, it can be bashed. Again, really easy to counter this skill, so the Sorc is going to have to kind of play around line of sight, manipulating their opponent, saying, okay, you can't target me, so either streaking away, creating distance, maybe drinking a move or an invisibility potion. There are a lot of ways to kind of get this skill off, but do keep in mind that you can be bash spammed in PvP and you can be interrupted by some mobs in PvE with special abilities. So in order to get that healing, you're going to have to be really smart in terms of how you apply it. But the really nice thing is that if you do get bashed or you do cancel this with block or dodge roll, it won't consume the stamina. But now we'll look at our morphs. Our first morph is called Dark Deal, and instead of draining stamina to give us health and magicka, it's going to drain magicka to give us health and stamina. Still going to have the same values, still not going to scale with anything special except that healing with % amps. Same thing. It's just helps the stamina Sorcerer get a little bit of their stamina back in exchange for magicka. So very, very helpful for stam Sorcs in PvP. Very helpful for tank Sorcs if they're trying to play that role in PvE or PvP. Really, really nice in terms of getting some stam and healing back. And then our other morph is Dark Conversion. All that does is it lowers the stamina cost by roughly a little bit under 700 stamina. So it just helps allow us to cast it a few more times before we run dry. Very, very helpful. This is going to be the morph you take if you're a Magi Sorc looking for some healing and magicka back, so for resource management. But again, that cast time is kind of going to diminish its function in PvE in terms of a damage dealer role, because you want to consistently be dealing damage. As a DPS, time is your most important element, and cast times really ruin PvE efficiency. So in PvP, not a big deal. You have time. You don't have to kill your opponent in 2 seconds. You have as much time as you need to kill your opponent, so cast times aren't as bad. So this Dark Conversion is very powerful in PvP, but again, keep in mind, you can be batched, you can be interrupted, so you're going to have to use line of sight. Line of sight is your best friend when using this skill, especially if you have major or minor expedition running around really hard to get casting this skill where you can't be bashed. But now we'll go on to our last active ability, and that is Daedric Mines. And Daedric Mines is going to scale with our max magicka, spell damage, spell critical, and spell penetration, as it does magic damage. Since it does magic damage, it'll scale with spell erosion, elemental expert, elfborn, and master at arms in the CP systems, because it is direct damage. So the way this skill works at base is we cast it, and instantly 3 mines are placed on the ground. After 3 seconds, these mines will be armed, and any time an enemy walks upon them, they will detonate for damage. Furthermore, when they detonate, they will also immobilize the target for 1.8 seconds. So again, it's casted in front of me in a triangle. I can cast it here. We notice, boop, all 3 of them go down. They arm after 3 seconds. So what I can do is I can place them here, right in front of me. 2 of them go down. Boom. 2 explode. So he consumed the 2 that were closest to him. They both did damage. He was immobilized for the 1.8 seconds. So I can also place it in different directions where I get 2 targets to hit. So he was immobilized and he was immobilized, and they both took that burst damage. So again, I can just demonstrate casting it. It explodes. It does damage. It immobilizes any targets it's hit. However, this skill is not a true AoE. It seems like it operates like an AoE because it's like, okay, if someone walks in the circle, it's going to explode, right? However, if I go over to this target dummy where I have all of them lined up and I perfectly place it on top and it explodes, it only hits one target. So it's not an AoE effect. That means it cannot be, or that it can be dodge rolled. So if a target dodge rolls through, they'll be immune to it because it's not an AoE effect. I really believe that Dart or Daedric Mine should be considered AoE damage. They should have cleave potential, and they should not be dodgeable. You're running into a mine. So it doesn't make much sense that it can be dodge rolled, and it's going to help counterplay a lot for the Sorc, because this is a very high magic cost ability, but it will last 36 seconds, and then again, it takes the 3 seconds to arm before they deal damage. If a target is large enough, they can proc multiples at the same time, so it can be used in PvE in very, very niche application for burst damage. You can use this as a pseudo-spammable, so a lot of really big targets, like the Arc Custodian in Halls of Fabrication. Perfect example. Very slow-moving target. He's going to walk on your mines. He's very big. They're all going to explode. You kind of need to do burst damage in that because he has moments of invulnerability, so you can kind of just place this there, he'll walk on, and boom, take a lot of damage. However, most targets, again, aren't going to consume them. We did notice earlier when I casted it here, since he did get hit by, or he got hit by both earlier, if you can perfectly cast it, I'm not very good at it, you kind of have to hit, like, just perfectly in between. So normally you can get them to consume 2 if they overlap. But yeah, it's really, really hard to do. Very frustrating. It takes perfect placement to do so. So there, we got him to consume 2 of them. So again, if you perfectly place or the target's hitbox is large enough, they can detonate multiples at once. Relatively straightforward. The Immobilize is nice for helping lock enemies in place. You can kind of just place this in front of you and say, okay, come over here, try and do your shit, and see what happens, sort of thing. Then if they get immobilized, you can kind of either retract or you can apply the pressure and do more damage. So it's very helpful in PvP. It has some niche application in PvE, but that magicka cost is going to be way too high for the amount of damage it does. But now we'll look at our morphs. Our first morph is called Daedric Tomb, and what this is going to do is instead of placing it in front of us, we'll have the option to place it wherever we want. So it'll be a ranged ability. It can go up to 28 meters away, and it's a reticle. It pulls up a reticle. Where do you want to place this? You launch it. All 3 arm. Instead of having the 3-second arm time, they appear instantly, so it's really, really strong. This is usually the morph you'll be taking in PvE if you're going to ever use this skill. Again, it's very, very niche in terms of where you can use it. It's arguably not that great because of that super high magicka cost and the damage, but it has the same function as Daedric Mines, except you can cast it at a range and it has no arm time. So it's really nice. You can kind of just spam cast it and boom, 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 boom. It'll do a lot of damage, but it'll drain the shit out of your magicka. So what I would like to see done with this is remove the immobilization. We already have the immobilization on the base morph, and our other morph retains it, so it doesn't make sense that we really have an immobilize on this skill. We already have it on in case if we need it, so more immobilization's kind of redundant. We don't need more of them, right? So I really think remove the immobilization and then just decrease the magicka cost of this skill, and boom, we're happy. Now we have somewhat of a feasible, quote-unquote, spammable. It would still be niche enough where it's like, okay, I still probably want to use crystal frags in most situations, or in case in other situations, whatever, if in case had a damage morph. So it's like, it's a niche option. It's understanding context and content at hand. Where and when do I want to utilize this? So just bringing down that magicka cost and then removing the immobilization would really help this morph option be a little bit more feasible in terms of meta and just endgame application. But it's still usable in some way, shape, or form at the moment. It's just very, very niche, and more times than not, I would rather just use Force Pulse or something else. But our next morph is the morph I'll be taking, and instead of placing 3 runes in a triangle in front of me, instead it places 5 runes in a pentagon around me. So it's still going to have that 3-second arm time. It's still going to be if anyone walks in on top of it, it explodes and does damage. Again, it's not an AoE, so it can be dodge rolled, and it's going to immobilize. So this is usually the PvP morph, because the really cool way that you can utilize this skill is you can prevent enemies from gap closing or punish them if they do. If an enemy, like a Nightblade, ambushes on me, or a two-hander build crit rushes, they're going to detonate a rune. They're going to take burst damage, and then they're going to be immobilized. So I can start backing up up, creating distance, or putting on the pressure. They get hit with that burst. I apply crystal. Yeah, I hit them with crystal frags, and they're taking a huge spike of damage, and now they have to get defensive because they were overzealous. The other thing we can do with this is we can place it as a preemptive barrier, like, don't come in my house. I am now a Templar. You are not allowed here, because if you do, you're going to be immobilized, and you're going to take high damage. So what I can do with this freedom is I can say, okay, now you can't come and bash me. Now I can come get my resources back with my Dark Exchange. So it's a really cool way to utilize this, primarily in PvP. Again, immobilizations are really not that great in PvE. It can multi-proc on enemies again, so it can do some nice burst damage with this skill. So it's decent in that regard, but again, since you have to be in melee range to apply that, it has a really high magic cost. It has a 3-second arm time. More times than not, you're really not going to be utilizing this skill in PvE. But again, in PvP, it's really, really great as a defensive option. A lot of times, Sorcs will be running this on their third bar, which we'll be gaining access to from an ultimate in Stormcalling. I'll explain that when we get to that video. But it's a very, very nice utility skill. It helps give the Sorc some breathing room and say, all right, you want to come fuck with me on my turf? You're going to be punished for it. So it's a really, really nice skill for the Sorc to kind of hold their grounds or keep enemies at bay. So that covers our active abilities. Now we'll get into our ultimate, our final ability, and that is Negate Magic. So Negate Magic at base will not scale with any stats. It has no damage, it has no healing, nothing. When we get to our morph options, one will deal damage, one will heal. Since it is an ultimate, those will scale with whatever stats are highest. So if your stamina is higher, stamina, weapon damage, weapon critical. And then if your magicka is higher, magicka, spell damage, spell critical. The damage morph, since it deals magic damage, will only use spell penetration. So even if your stamina is higher, only spell pen. The damage morph will also only scale with spell erosion, elemental expert, elfborn, and thaumaturge because it's going to be considered damage over time. And then the healing morph option will scale with blessed, elfborn, and quick recovery in the CP system because it's healing done and received. So we'll explain a little bit more when we get there, but at base, what the skill does is it's going to stun a target that's inside of it if they're not a player. So if you are an NPC, you're going to be stunned for up to 12 seconds in the duration. It's 10 seconds at base. Persistence makes it 12. It has a 225 ultimate cost, which is quite high. However, due to the Sorc passives in our other trees, this will be below 200 ultimate cost. It's very nice for AoE locking enemies in place. But in PvE, again, this usually isn't going to be worthwhile because enemies can be immune to stuns, especially bosses. But in Overland content, you'll lock them in place. I believe it only affects up to 6 targets because it is a secondary effect. Usually stuns and immobilizes only affect up to 6 targets hit. So keep that in mind. But players, if you are a player, instead of being stunned, you will be silenced. And this effect has no target cap. You can silence well beyond 6 players. It'll go up to 60, anyone who's standing inside. So it's very, very powerful for fighting larger groups in terms of silencing. In terms of what silence does, silencing an enemy prevents them from casting an ability if it costs magicka. There are some bugs where some stamina skills are still being silenced. If you notice any, please put that as in a bug report. It is not intended. It is meant to silence you from casting magicka abilities. So that means you can't cast heals, you can't cast damaging abilities if they cost magicka. So it's really helpful for keeping an enemy in place and preventing them from helping their allies. So this is best used on tanks and healers because that way it's like, okay, you want to heal your group? Not anymore. You're going to have to get out of this. So it's a really nice skill to kind of counteract those breath spammers in a group. And since it's an AoE, it's really strong if you can get them in a bottleneck area. I'm going to demonstrate a really, really efficient way to use this skill. So there is a lot of uses of Negate Magic, again, primarily from a PvP function because that silence is so strong. So one thing we can do is that we can amplify that whole don't come mess with me thing. We can have our our Daedric Mines down, and we can have Negate active, and when we're inside of it, we can just kind of spam cast this, because if an enemy comes inside, they're going to intentionally silence themselves. So if they're a stam build, they're going to be able to live through it because their abilities cost stamina. They will not be silenced unless they have like a magic ability on their bar. But a tank or a healer is not going to be able to come and interrupt you. or Magicka DPS. The other way we can utilize this skill is we can cast this and then on top of an enemy being silenced. So if they're silenced, they're going to be able to move around. But we can encase them in place so that they cannot leave. And again, remember, immobilizations have no cooldown. So we can continuously cast this on them, and it's like, you are not leaving my negate unless you waste your stamina to dodge roll, or you apply shuffle or forward momentum, because those are stamina abilities. They can't be silenced. They give immunity to immobilizations, or they dodge roll out. So those are the only ways they're going to be able to escape this silence. Otherwise, you can lock them in with crowd control, you can hard stun them, you can immobilize, you can snare. Locking them in place will be to your benefit, because snaring those or silencing those healers is going to be beneficial, and sometimes the only way to kill some groups in PvP. So really helpful for countering Zergs. Some things to note that many people don't know, or one thing that many people do know, is you can negate. So if negate also removes negative placed AoE damage over time effects on the ground. So things like Ritual of Retribution, Arrow Barrage, Caltrops, Path of Darkness, Wall of Elements, all of these are AoE dots or AoE buffs that are placed on the ground. Negate magic consumes them upon application. So I place negate magic, anything that was on the ground will be eaten up. Negate magic is considered an AoE damage over time effect in and of itself. It operates as a buff on the ground. So if an enemy sorcerer places negate on your negate, yours will vanish and theirs will take precedence or priority. So sometimes in a large PvP fight, it is who has more sorcerers, who negates the negate, and then that negate can be whoever casts negate last wins pretty much in terms of the negate battle. So you have to be careful that your negate can be negated. However, there is one tiny little thing that people don't know, and that negate, even though you cannot stun NPCs, like let's say I place this on Rakat, negate magic in and of itself won't do anything. It's not going to do anything. It might eat up some negative effects if they're placed from the boss, but Rakat is, hey, I'm a boss. You can't stun me. I'm going to ignore this. However, there are some really cool interactions within the weapon skill lines in this game, primarily dual wield, with one of this called Ruffian. Ruffian gives you 15% more damage when attacking a stunned, immobilized, disoriented, or silenced enemy. So, since Rakat cannot be stunned, he will instead be silenced. He'll still be able to cast spells because he's a boss, he's an NPC, he doesn't have resources, so they don't scale with magicka or stamina for him. He's going to be able to do mechanics, but he will be flagged as silenced, and all dual-wield attacks will deal 15% more damage with this skill. So it's a really helpful way for sorcerers to have some added group utility. Yes, I can sacrifice giving damage from maybe I ran Meteor or maybe I ran Destro Ultimate. I sacrifice that damage, but I can apply negate, which makes all of my dual-wield DPS deal 15% more damage with all dual-wield attacks. So light, heavy attacks, Flurry, Lacerate, Twin Slashes, Steel Tornado. Very, very efficient if you are in a stamina-heavy group. Guess what? Today's meta has a lot of stam DPS, so this is a very, very efficient ultimate. Consumes negative effects, silences targets, flags NPCs as silenced, so they take 15% more damage, and stuns targeted or NPCs that can be stunned. Very, very phenomenal ultimate. One of the best in the game in terms of utility. Now we'll look at our morphs. Our first morph is called Suppression Field. It's going to have all of that fantastic stuff, and it's going to deal damage to those targets that are standing inside up to 60 every half second. So it lasts 12 seconds. That means you'll do 24 ticks of damage during this duration. Very, very powerful. This is usually the morph you're going to take in PvE. That way you get a little bit of that damage back. And yes, it'll do less damage than a Meteor or a Destro Ultimate, but again, it has that really powerful utility. So if you're doing, let's say, Rakat or a final boss fight, it is more advantageous for the group if you have a bunch of stamina DPS to use Suppression Field instead of Destro Ultimate. It'll cost less, it'll have that longer duration, and it will empower your allies. So it's a very, very efficient ultimate, very underrated. A lot of people don't understand that. So really, really strong. Next, we have Absorption Field, which instead of dealing damage every half second, will heal our allies every half second. This heal has a 6-person target cap. All heals in the game have are capped at 6 players affected, so it's not going to be as strong in terms of efficiency as Suppression Field because you can damage 60 targets, but you can only heal 6. So that is kind of weaker, but it's still really nice. I did like utilizing this skill when I play with beginner players or pugs, or if I'm helping out in content like Sanctum Ophidia was the first place I really fell in love with this skill, because when Sanctum Ophidia first came out, when they redid it, there was a lot of damage from poison. People were dying left and right, and it's like, how do we get more healing? And I was like, oh, let's try Absorption Field. So as a stamina Sorc, everyone laughed. I was pretty much a healer. I did really nice damage, and I had some healing to the group with Absorption Field and Vigor. So it's a really cool way to give some utility to your group. It's not very meta. It's not going to be all that amazing, but it does have that utility. And in PvE, again, you can use this morph option as a don't come in my area. Like, I can place my mines, I can place my heal negate, I'll be healing in it. If an enemy wants to come inside, they'll be silenced. So I have this freedom, this moment of reprieve, like this 12-second window where I'm getting really big healing, and anyone who wants to come close in melee range is at the risk of being silenced and taking burst damage. So it's really cool, helping that sorcerer hold their own ground in PvP, say, come fight me, I dare you, sort of thing. But that concludes the Dark Magic skill line. Again, there's a lot of really cool stuff in here, but when we look at the big picture, the biggest issue is that so many of these skills do the same thing in different iterations. Daedric Minefield and Encase do the same thing. One does damage, one just has a longer immobilize. So, more times than not, we're going to be taking Daedric Minefield because we want damage associated with it. But if we're playing a support role in maybe Cyrodiil or something like that, and our pure goal is to lock enemies in place so that they sit in Destro Ultimate, they sit in Negate, then we can use Encase. So there is some discrepancy in terms of where we take these, but I really think allowing morph options to kind of deviate away from the original intent of the skill and add a little bit more flavor and diversity into the Sorc skill line would do wonders for this class in terms of allowing the Sorc to play differently. So instead of everyone playing the same pet build or the same Crystal Frag build or the same burst build in Cyrodiil, we would have some diversity in terms of, ooh, maybe he wants to play a damaging Encase build. Maybe he wants to play the mine build. He would have some options from the skill line instead of just being like, I'm only going to use Crystal Frags, or I'm only going to use Defensive Rune, or maybe Dark Exchange. So I really think enabling some of these morph options and giving them a little bit difference in terms of deviation, letting them stand out and say, hey, I'm a damage dealer morph, or hey, I'm a healer morph, or I'm a utility morph. Giving them a little bit more identity would do wonders for this class and really help branch out decision making and being like, okay, I want to make this really cool build, instead of just, okay, all these kind of do the same thing just with different words or different animations. So again, just my 2 cents. A lot of people really like these skills, so it's kind of hard to say, all right, which one do we really change without pissing people off? But some of these, like Shattering Prison, aren't that great, or the other morph of Daedric Minefield, like, they have uses, but they're so niche that instead of being niche, we could make them a little bit better by adding a tiny bit more efficiency to them. So again, just my humble opinion, but hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hopefully you've learned a thing or two. Again, if I've misspoken during this, or I asked a question and there was like, how does this work when you CC break, like the Shattering Prison? What happens when I dodge roll? Do I still take the damage? So if you have the answer to those, please leave them in the comment. Help out the community and myself. I will annotate them with a pinned comment, or I'll try and have like a little a quiz in the top corner. That's the best way we can do annotations these days. But again, thank you all so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys around. Videos like this one are made possible by the amazing support from these phenomenal people. Between my life, the game, and everything in between, I'd never be able to do as much as I can without them. Thank you to everyone for the empowerment, regardless from financial or in-game support, constructive feedback, or simple encouragement. You are all amazing.